From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Naturally, when you talk about Big Ten spring football, you talk about 80 degrees, sunny, sun shining, the sandy beaches of the, not Lake Michigan, but the Pacific Ocean. With that, we are talking USC spring football with Ryan Dyrud from LAFB. Big Ten football, USC football, I'm sure it's different for you, man. This is different for me as well.
Yeah, brother. No, it is. I appreciate you having me on. This is my first show actually on a Big Ten show. So it's fun to be here as we make this transition. It's going to be a super fun season and excited to get into it with you. So thanks for having me.
First of many, hopefully, here talking Trojans on this channel as well. So let's dive into the position that Lincoln Riley is really most known for, and that is the quarterback position. What he has been able to do over the years at both Oklahoma and USC, it's number one, right? It's at the top, his track record in terms of quarterback development. Now, when we look at this year, you look at Miller Moss, you look at Jaden Maeva, quarterback battle, according to what Lincoln Riley is saying right now. It seems like maybe in your circles, and when I'm kind of looking at this thing from my view, it seems like what we saw in the bowl game and that where this has kind of progressed, it seems like this is Miller Moss's job. How have you seen and maybe evaluated this battle as we head into the spring game on Saturday?
Yeah, 100%. This is Miller Moss's job to lose. We all saw, which I'm sure we'll talk about, the Holiday Bowl and, record-setting performance with 6 touchdowns and what he was able to do. And he's, he's gone into spring and had a great spring camp. We've talked to Lincoln Riley a lot. We've talked to, the offensive coaches a lot. Coach Heward now is kind of running the quarterbacks there. And, you can kind of get indications by media availability, and it's always been Miller Moss who's talking to the media. So that kind of gives you the indication that he is the starter as of right now. What's interesting about this, Ted, is I don't foresee, so I don't want anyone to quote me too much on this, but I don't at all foresee a 2-quarterback system. But I would not be shocked at all if there are certain packages that maybe they run with Jaden Maeva, because he does give you a skill set that's, a little more similar to like a Caleb Williams, but very different than Miller Moss. So as of now, we'll see at the spring game on Saturday, kind of what the split is there. And then obviously when we get in the fall camp, things can change. But as of now, this is Miller Moss's show. But it'd be really fascinating to see kind of how they still kind of interlude Maeva, who's the former, Mountain West freshman of the year. So obviously wants to be on the field and play. So he could still be involved a little bit, but this is Miller Moss's team as of, April 19th.
He was impressive in Vegas in 2023 with the Rebels. Let's talk about this offense as a whole and maybe the structure of this offense. When you looked at last year and the year before, you saw Caleb Williams playing that hero ball. Did a pretty darn good job of it, right? Getting outside the pocket, making plays, and then firing the ball like a laser down the field. You watch this bowl game in the Holiday Bowl, Miller Moss, it seems a lot more structured. I know you haven't been able to watch a ton of what they've put out there at spring practice, but as we head to this spring game, are you expecting a more structured offense for USC instead of that playmaking ability that we saw from Caleb last season?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, some of that, I think Holiday Bowl was partially, in that structure, running the true Lincoln Riley offense that he wants to run. That's no disrespect to Caleb Williams, but that's just, his style and his play. And I think part of it too is maybe Louisville watching tape of Caleb Williams and what they expected and weren't used to the 2-second reads and throws that Miller Moss was doing. So we'll see it all unfold at the spring game, kind of how it looks. But yeah, I definitely anticipate this to be a more traditional Lincoln Riley kind of, try to get a 1 read, you get a 2 read seam route kind of thing where they can open things up and free some of these big, fast, young receivers, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and get them involved. Whereas, a lot with Caleb and to his credit, which he was so good at. And obviously there were some offensive line issues last year as well. So he was kind of forced to, but there was a lot of times, Ted, when, and again, I don't at all want to, Caleb Williams was one of the best quarterbacks to ever play at USC and will be the number 1 overall pick. But there were a lot of times when you're watching when his first option was open and he didn't make the play and ended up playing that hero ball. And we see these fantastic highlights, but there was times when it could have been a lot easier for him. Miller Moss will do those easier things. We'll see how well he does them, but it'll be a lot more simplistic in that regard. So to answer your question in a very long roundabout way, yes, I think we'll see a lot more within the system, within structure, and Miller Moss just kind of doing the fine things that Lincoln Riley wants him to do.
That structure was really on display in the Holiday Bowl. And let's talk about, hey, if you got to throw for 350 yards and 6 touchdowns, guys got to get open. Let's talk about those guys, the wide receivers. Now, outside of Kyron Hudson, there's a lot of first-year guys. There's a lot of second-year guys, a lot of young guys. But, man, do those guys look talented. They got a lot of stars behind their name, right? And they were on display a little bit in that Holiday Bowl as well. When you look at the Jacoby Lanes, when you look at the Deuce Robinsons, the Zachariah Branch, Mekhi Lemon, the list goes on and on. What are you looking forward to them and maybe the depth of the room as we approach the spring game on Saturday?
Yeah, it's an incredibly talented group, and I do anticipate them adding one more receiver in this transfer portal window. But it's so talented. The biggest thing will be who will step up to be that kind of number one option. Kyron Hudson, I think, surprised a lot of people last year when he ended up as one of the top 3 starters on the depth chart to open the season alongside Brendan Rice and Taj Washington, and held that all season long. Didn't get the production and the numbers out of it, but he was on the field for the majority of all starting reps. And so he'll kind of replicate that. I think when you look at what the other guys give you, it's a lot of versatility. I mean, Deuce Robinson, the size that he has, the catch radius he has, the ability to not only jump up and get it, but he has that breakaway speed that we saw some last year. Zach Branch obviously is just your pure playmaker burner, can do it all. You can get him on a jet sweep, on a quick out route, and he can take it to the house. Mekhi Lemon is one that I'm very interested in, cannot wait to watch. An unbelievable athlete, played here in SoCal at Los Alamitos High School. Came in with Malachi Nelson. They were the duo recruiting pair that Lincoln Riley got. Now, obviously, Malachi Nelson's with Boise State. But we saw Lemon, catch some good contested balls in that Holiday Bowl when he got some more reps. So he's a guy that I can see more as that kind of taking the place of a Taj Washington, playing a little more slot, playing a little more possession receiver-like, because you've got the burners and Deuce and Branch. You've got the kind of outside guy in Kyron Hudson. And so Mekhi Lemon, I think, gives you that. And the last guy I'll mention, who probably should be the guy we're talking about most, actually, is Jacoby Lane. I mean, he's a guy I think that might end up being the number one receiver, has had a phenomenal spring camp, has gotten praised not just by coaches, but all his teammates. He's roommates with Deuce Robinson, so obviously they're coming up together. But Jacoby Lane, I mean, you saw the 2 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl. Didn't see him at all really throughout the season, but we saw him in the Holiday Bowl. The size, the speed, the catch radius, so he'll be a guy to watch for in the Big Ten as a name that probably not a lot of people outside of SoCal know of, but probably should get known because he'll have a big impact pretty quickly.
Yeah, when you talk about those wide receivers, I'm glad you saved Jacoby Lane for last, because that was the guy, at least in my limited Trojan knowledge and what I've been able to do and find, he seems to be the guy that's going to step up as maybe an all-around target. And you mentioned the abilities and the attributes of this guy. You talk about the length and the size of Deuce Robinson. You talk about just the playmaking ability of Zach Branch and then the slot ability of Mekhi Lemon. It seems like Jacoby Lane kind of brings them all together as well. Let's move over to the defensive side of the football. Now, Ryan, you're in Big Ten country. I'm hearing it on a weekly, sometimes on a daily. USC was a bad defensive team. They're not going to be good. They're soft in the trenches. But when you really dive into this thing and you really look at their defense, they have assembled one of the best defensive coaching staffs in all of college football this season. Danton Lynn coming over as a defensive coordinator. You look at Coach Hendy there on the defensive line. You look at my guy Matt Entz at the linebackers coach as well. This is a who's who right now. What are you looking forward to in this spring game? What are some things that you really got your eye on that you want to find out from this defense?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing right off the bat is simplicity and knowing your role. I think last year what we saw a lot is whether the defense was just too complicated or what it was, but guys were often confused. Like the ball was being snapped and guys were still out of position, not where to go. And that's why you see all these busted plays and Ron guys covering backs on wheel routes that go for 80 yards and whatnot. Yeah. So really want to just see fundamentally sound, simplistic pre-snap defense. Guys knowing their job, knowing their role, knowing what they do, knowing their gaps, scheme and whatnot. So that I think is the first thing I'm looking for, because obviously you're not out there trying to kill your offense in a spring game, but you're hitting, you got the pads on. But really the big thing is like how these fundamentals, how these sound playing has translated in a short time in spring practices since these coaches have been here. Because, I mean, you said it. I mean, this is a unbelievable staff. Coach Henderson, in my opinion, was the best defensive line coach in the NFL. Now he's in the college ranks. The pedigree speaks for itself. Coach Entz, I mean, what a football coach. If you talk to Coach Entz for a second, you're like, this is a Midwestern just football coach that is always raspy by the end of practice. And Coach Belk, I think, is a great secondary coach, has defensive coordinator pedigree coming from Houston in the South, and obviously big ties in Texas. So that's helped on the recruiting trail. And then it all comes together with Danton Lynn and what he's been able to do, having the NFL ties, how he turned UCLA last year from an 88th ranked defense to 11th ranked defense in a short time. So mainly spring game, looking at the fundamentals. We'll see a lot of new starters on this. I mean, you look at that secondary as a whole. Kamari Ramsey, who transferred over, is probably going to start. Akili Arnold, who transferred over, is probably going to start. John Humphrey, who transferred over, is probably going to start. So a lot of new faces for the first time. So how up to speed are they? How clean they looked, how sound they look. That's really what I'm looking for. And then you build upon that to really get to being dominant, by fall.
I covered that North Dakota State Bison. First job was in Fargo, North Dakota. And that, if you don't know anything about Matt Entz, remember Chris Kleiman, who's the head coach of Kansas State, was coaching there. Craig Bowl before them. They are just a tough, physical. They are the embodiment of Big Ten football, really, at the FCS level. And I just love seeing Matt. A lot of people were very surprised, right, in Bison Nation and maybe in Trojan Nation a little bit when that move was made from the head coach to a position coach. But that is, trust me, that is a big get with the B1G at the linebacker on the defensive side of the ball. Speaking of B1G, big gains. I want to talk about that. We've been seeing it on social media from this USC strength and conditioning staff. Lincoln Riley said in one of his media availabilities that he has been floored. He's been wowed at some of the gains that have been made. How much emphasis has USC put into this now with their move to the Big Ten, into getting beefier up front and really beefing up some things in the strength and conditioning program this spring?
Yeah, huge emphasis. Hats off to Benny Wiley, the strength and conditioning coach, who's basically totally changed course from just 365 days ago. When you look at what they were doing on defense, specifically, offense, they've definitely bulked up as well. Yeah. If you look at photos of Miller Moss and even Jacoby Lane, they've definitely bulked up. But the emphasis was on obviously the trenches, on the offensive line, defensive line, and then just defense in general to be able to, play this style of football that is the Big Ten. The Pac-12, I think, is a good brand of football. It was, or I guess I should say was a good brand of football. I think it doesn't get enough credit for the physicality that it has, but it's not the same trench warfare that the Big Ten is. And so Coach Riley and the rest of the staff put an emphasis on that. And it's, worked in spades when you see, a guy simply put as Jai Babasari, maybe you know him from being from Minnesota country, originally committed to Minnesota. And now he's committed at USC. And, I don't know the exact number, but like 30 plus pounds almost from just being an incoming freshman. I mean, it's insane what they've done, and it's necessary. So it's been cool to see the transformation that this team has made just in the gains department.
Spring games. What's the next move after Saturday in the spring transfer portal period? Offensive line, maybe? You talked about wide receiver. Are they going to try to polish up that defense a little bit more? Where do you see the Trojans having their eyes set as we really get into the spring portal once the spring game is complete on Saturday?
Yeah, so it really comes down to three position groups, and I think first and foremost it is defensive line. They did lose Stanley T, who's been a nice rotational, been with the Trojans for 4 years, so that was a tough loss in terms of locker room, but wasn't going to be a starter, but they still need to fill that. And Isaiah Rakes, who transferred to them in the fall, hit the portal, and he was kind of slotted to be that starting beefy nose tackle next to Bear Alexander. So that will be a huge, we've talked about, Dominic Williams at a TCU as a potential target. There's a lot of guys that maybe they'll target to fill that. Jay Toya from UCLA, formerly of USC, just entered the portal again last night. So maybe he comes back to USC to kind of fill that. Offensive line is the other position group. Zamandola, their top recruit overall in the 24 class, but specifically on the offensive line, into the portal to be closer to home. He wasn't going to start this year. Right. Indications from Lincoln Riley were he was having a nice camp, but was still a far ways away from even cracking the starting rotation. So it wasn't a loss in that regard, but they definitely need to add depth there, because we saw last year that the unit got banged up, and when you got to rotate guys, you need depth there. And then, as I mentioned, wide receiver, I think they will add one I don't think it's necessarily a need per se, but they do like to run a lot of, heavy rotation. It's a fast offense when it's humming. And so guys are coming in and out a lot. So they want to have a lot of receivers at their disposal. Justice Ross Simmons out of Colorado State, former local kid here. He went to Inglewood High School. That's a name to kind of keep an eye on as a guy that could come in. I mentioned Mekhi Lemon playing slot, but I think he could be great in the slot here with SC. So those are the three positions, but defensive line is definitely the big one because they need support next to Bear Alexander, who was huge. They were able to retain him. All those rumors swirling, they kept him there. You got to have another big guy. And last thing I'll say, Ted, is, when you look at Coach Henderson and you look at his defenses that he ran with the Rams, there was always that big beefy nose tackle. When you look at Greg Gaines, you look at Sebastian Joseph Day and whatnot. And so they need that to run kind of what he wants to run on the defensive line for the nose tackle.
Yeah, well, you look at the interior especially. There were some teams like when I did my transfer portal needs that I put out on Twitter, like Oregon has a lot of great players at a lot of positions. I mentioned the trenches, and they have good players in the O-line and D-line, but I think one thing when you enter the Big Ten, and we've seen it year after year, I've been seeing it when I've been watching Big Ten football for 20-plus years, just because you got 5 or 6 guys on an O-line, it is a grind through 9 games of the schedule. You need some depth. Ryan, I want to thank you for joining me. Ryan Dyrud of LAFB. Let's talk soon, all right?
Ted, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Best of luck. We'll talk through the season.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.